Students, we have been learning in the last few sessions on the errors that can creep in the age and sex structure of the data. Age and sex, as we have already pointed out, are the two important critical variables for any demographic analysis. We have seen how errors can creep in the age structure of the data and what are the methods to evaluate it, and even how one can adjust such kind of data. We have also to some extent seen the errors that can creep in the sex composition of the data. The sex composition is also very critical demographic indicator, and any errors in that data also will affect all the other demographic estimation. So naturally, one has to look at little more carefully what are the possibilities of errors in the sex data, and what are the methods to evaluate it, and what are the possible corrections that can be done to make better estimates for the demographic and population indicators. So let us once more carefully look at the sex data of the demography, which are derived from various sources. As all of you are aware, population statistics, like all other statistics, are obtained by either enumeration or registration or some other means. Either you are expected to register your vital events, births, deaths, or you have been, or there are possibilities that the enumeration is done through a census or a survey. In both the instances, there are possibilities of errors in the sex data, and that is why it is often told that the census or the survey or even registration data are subject to several errors. So let us look at what are the possibilities of errors in a data. First, the data errors can happen when we are collecting information or compiling data. So the methods used in the collecting and compiling data are very critical in reducing this data problem. For instance, the tools used for the data collection and how the editing of that tools are being carried out, and how the data is compiled, whether it is through computer or whether it is through other programs or other ways, all these might influence the quality of the data. The quality can obviously be also sex specific. That's why it is often important to look at what are the methods used in collecting information. And secondly, the relative efficiency with which the methods are applied are also critically important, because knowing well that there are possibilities of errors creeping in both in the age and sex data, often there are several measures are adopted in the questionnaire if you are collecting by enumeration, so that the such errors can be controlled to the minimum. But it is often found that this relative efficiency of these methods are very important, and whether these methods are understood by the investigators, or methods are understood well by those who are executing the survey, are also very critical in reducing the data. Thirdly, there are also instances of willingness to reporting, especially when we are conducting a survey. The willingness to participate in a survey are option, especially when we are conducting a survey. The willingness to participate in a survey many often it is optional, and in case the respondent is ready to participate, it is also important that he or she report the data accurately. But there can be issues on the willingness to participate as well as on the reporting of events. There are several errors that are possible in different contexts, in different countries, on different cultural settings on sex enumeration and reporting of the information on the sex of the people, both within the household as well as within the society. There are a number of socio-cultural factors that influence such a behavior. That behavior is many times understood that there are specific cultural contexts whether women are not valued well. As a result, the reporting of women in the surveys as well as for the registration is often neglected compared to the settings where actually women's status is much higher. Moreover, the other cultural settings like marriage, the women moving from one household to the other households, and the births, the women coming back to the natal house for the birth, all these makes several complications on reporting of the events, reporting of about the status of the mother or the women who are moved from one household to the other. In general, there are several errors that can creep in, both because of the survey methods, the respondents, and the larger socio-cultural milieu, which all creates a situation where there can be serious errors that can creep in the sex data in several contexts, both in India, which we have learned in the previous sessions as well as many other countries, and particularly the South Asian countries. We will look at some of these issues in a very general context and then see what are the measures possible to address them. It is also important for us to look at what is the major significance of the sex data, because why one is so worried about the quality of the data on sex? If the data is wrong, does it going to affect significantly on the estimation of many indicators? So let us first examine what is the importance or what is the significance of the data on the sex, which is often collected in any demographic investigation. As all of you know, sex of an individual holds an important place in demography. Invariably, all demographic surveys or census or other investigation or even demographic registration of vital events all invariably collect this information. Thus, it plays a crucial role in the demographic settings. Secondly, the sex data is required for planning purpose, particularly for the health services, because many countries or even many states in India has several policies addressing specific sections of the population and particularly to one sex compared to the other. For instance, any maternal health benefit will exclusively for females and also those who are giving birth. And there are also several such instances where sex specific interventions are often necessary for the government for the policy and planning purposes. The significant example comes from the health services. In the health services, because of the specific nature of intervention necessary for the mother's health as well as for the children, it is often found that there are huge demand for data, accurate data in the field of health for different sexes. If the data is inaccurate, that significantly affect the quality of the planning and program interventions in a particular setting. Thirdly, demographic events are generally differentiated by sex because the fertility or the number of children born to a couple, duration of marriage, and spacing between births all necessitates a sex-wise information, because the estimation of fertility, the total fertility rate, is specifically using information on the age distribution of the women or females. Thus, it is not possible to estimate a fertility rate without accurate information on the age structure of the female population. It is also true of the number of children born for the estimation of sex ratio, which also critically necessitates that the information on both sexes are captured equally well, so that you get an accurate information on the sex ratio. The duration of marriage and the spacing between births, all this information are very vital for many policy interventions, and most of this information has to be collected by considering sex differentials, because the marriage pattern in any country, and particularly in the context of South Asia as well as Asian countries, there is significant gender differentials. The male many often marry later compared to females, and marriage patterns, the approaches to the marriage, all make significant difference between sexes. And we also find there are substantial differences between the death rate of the sexes, especially at older ages, which are considered to be largely because of the biological differences. If you have to examine it in detail, it necessitates that such information is available with required quality, so that one can get information on what is happening on the gender differentials in mortality. It is expected that the females are living longer, as well as the death rate of the females are much lower than the males throughout their lifespan. And particularly in the older ages, the females are expected to be living longer, and the death rate of the females are comparatively lower than that of males, which leads to large number of widows in a society compared to the widowers, and so on. Therefore, it is important that such information is available to understand the larger biological phenomena which exist in a society, and whether there are any deviation from this biological fact. Moreover, sex data is also important while comparing their fertility and mortality levels, because one has to understand the differential fertility and mortality in any population. We need to get accurate information of the if you have to get accurate information on the fertility and mortality in any context, we need to have accurate data on sex differential data by population groups, especially by different sexes. The parents are less interested to report girls' birth compared to the boys' birth. That is one of the major reasons for the underreporting of female birth as well as female population in any context. question to ask why it is taking place, why actually there is less number of females are counted or the less female births are reported compared to male births in a specific context. This is not true universally, but definitely true in many developing countries context and particularly in the South Asian context. The female mortality is underreported. There are also various reasons for it. There can be female infanticide, the parents would not like to report. There can be higher infant and child mortality because of the neglect of the females. The parents would not like to report because it was partly because of their neglect. So there are several reasons where actually females birth get not reported or it gets underreported. It's also possible that at the household level, the parents are ashamed to report the female births if the previous births were also of the same sex. So because of this, the cultural aspects of having several females and the shame associated with it in some societies, it is often found that the female infants go underreported and while the male births are often reported. So there are several possibilities of underreporting of female births and later years as well the female mortality, because it is very often found that the registration of vital events, particularly in the mortality, there is no incentive to report the female deaths or there is no incentive to register the female deaths, as many often the property etc. are not attached to females but only to males. The male death registration becomes important for the subsequent property transfer, while as female does not have any asset, particularly in the immovable property, so their death registration did not get that much significance or importance. So we often found there are several ways the female mortality gets underreported. Yet another interesting fact which is often found in the data was that age heaping is also much higher among females due to high level of illiteracy, because while the parents or the family member might remember exact age of the male member or the male child, they may often forget the female child, age of the female child or the female member, because the female child or female member of the household is not given that much importance within the household as that of a male member. As a result, the female age as well as even undercount of the females also goes up because of the unimportance given to a particular sex, female sex. Now let us come back to some of the measures which can be used to understand and to measure the undercount of the females or the sex differentials, which is often noticed in many demographic indicators. One of the important ways to understand the problems with sex data is by computing a sex ratio. It is a very commonly used measure to represent the sex composition of the population. But we also know that the sex ratio also can be used as a very vital quality indicator of the sex data, and it can assess by looking at the sex ratio of the population how this population age composition. By looking at the sex ratio of the population, it is possible to assess the quality of the sex data collected in surveys and census. As you know, the overall sex ratio is the ratio of the number of males per 1000 or 100 females in a population, simply by dividing the number of males divided by the number of females multiplied by 100, you will get a sex ratio. You can also compute this sex ratio by specific age groups, whether it is for the child, whether it is for the newborn, whether it is for the adults, or whether it is for the old age. By looking at these data, we will also get fair understanding whether there has been a systematic under registration or under enumeration of the female birth compared to the male birth, or female population compared to the male population. The female mortality is typically lower than male mortality in most populations. The sex ratio should reflect this mortality differentials. Therefore, it is often found, if you consider sex ratio at birth, it is typically above 100, indicating there are more males are born in a population compared to females. There are exceptions to this because of the continued sex selective abortions which is happening in some of the South Asian countries or even in some of the East Asian countries. Otherwise, in general, it is found that the sex ratio at birth is in the vicinity of 105 males per 100 females. In sub-Saharan Africa, it is around closer to 100, but otherwise the sex ratio can be used as a good indicator to understand how far the females' births are undercounted. The sex ratio at birth outside a particular range indicative of sex selective abortions and perhaps indicative of this sex selective under enumeration. So, sex selective under enumeration also result in a lower sex ratio at birth. So, in India, if this sex ratio at birth is more than the expected value of 105, this is because there are sex selective abortions as well as there is sex selective under enumeration. Let us look at some of the data available on the sex distribution of the population from other countries. Here a data from the 2001 census of Nepal is depicted. What does it indicate? It gives information on the distribution of male and female by ages in Nepal according to 2001 census. Strangely, you would see that there are considerable heaping in the age data of females in Nepal compared to males. We would expect in general, if the data has been captured accurately, even in case there is heaping, it should be equal to male and female. So, it indicates that even within the household, the male information on the death, the information on the age of the males are accurately reported, while the information on the age of the females are not reported accurately. So, we see such drastic differences in the sex data, sex reporting, data reporting in many population groups. This is also true in the case of India, where we have seen in our previous sessions the age and sex data from in India, which also typically portrays such enormous difference in the quality. Let us now look at the second graph, which gives you an understanding of the population data by sexes by different age groups. Even here we see some interesting patterns in Nepal. Initially, the population of females has been lower as expected, perhaps because of the sex ratio is favorable to males always, but later the number of females goes up, but and in the subsequent years, perhaps beyond 35 or 40, again the number of females comes down. So you would see these variations and differentials which are normally not expected in the population, so indicating that there are problems with the accuracy of the age data. Now let us look at the indicator sex ratio using the same data of Nepal in 2001 census. This information is also given for the single year ages as well as for age groups. For the single year, even that matter for the age groups, you would see wild fluctuations in the sex ratio. Initially it was high in single year and then comes down drastically and goes up, sometimes goes up considerably up, even above 110 mark in some years, and goes down much significantly sometimes, and towards the end it is much lower, perhaps as expected. The same picture is also seen even if a smoothened type of analysis when you are considering age groups. We also see these kinds of fluctuations, indicating that the sex data which is available in many contexts are really not accurate. Therefore, it is important that the sex data is adjusted by considering indicators like sex ratios, which will give a fairly good idea on the quality of such data. We have already studied in the earlier sessions on the sex ratio of children, child sex ratio, which is available in India from different census period, especially for the 0 to 6 age group. We have also seen the problems with such data, and if there are under enumeration of females in the younger ages, obviously that will also affect the sex ratio at the 0 to 6 age group, in addition to the worsening sex ratio at birth, which is definitely taking place in the country. It clearly explains that there is less complete registration of deaths as well as enumeration of female girls in India. Sex ratio and death rates of children in different parts of the country are in close agreement with the fact that there is not only that the female deaths are underestimated, underenumerated, but they are also undercounted. So now let us come back to some conclusions from what we learned in this class. Firstly, the sex information, the sex data are very critical part of the demographic analysis, because many demographic indicators require accurate sex information, failing which the most of the indicators computed from the demographic data would become inaccurate. But we have also found the poor reporting of sex data, and there are different errors that creeping in this data. The complete reporting of sex data not only is important, but it also important to get the data without any errors in the age of the females as well as males. Complete birth registration is one of the ways to go for it, but we know that death registration and birth registration is inadequate in many instances. Complete reporting of sex data will be useful for planning purposes, for policy purposes, and it is important that measures are adopted to capture accurate data. Till then, we have to use several measures which we have learned in the earlier sessions, as well as today in this class on using information like sex ratio at birth for different ages as well as for different age groups to understand the quality of data and thereby adjust its inaccuracy. Thank you.